Welcome to Data Wars. Welcome back to another episode of Data Wars. I'm your host, Srivastava, and joining me is my co-host, Prash Chandramohan. Today we're diving into the world of data strategy, AI innovation, and data governance with an expert who has been shaping the industry for over 17 years. Join me to welcome Tejasvi Adigada.
That's right,
Yeah, hi.
Ash. Tejasvi is an enterprise architect, data strategist, and the privacy officer with a lot of experience leading data transformation initiatives across US, UK, India, Australia. Oh gosh, there's so many countries here, Vietnam. He's also an author and a speaker and an expert in everything from data governance to AI, cloud modernization to metadata management, my favorite topic. So, Tejasvi, welcome to Data Wars podcast.
Well, it's a pleasure, having to be here. Thanks, Ash and Prash, for inviting me over to the Data Wars podcast. Yeah, let's get started.
Um, I don't know where to start. So you have such a diverse background, Tej. You started as an engineer. You have worked with banks and consulting firms, and you've even led data offices at major financial institutions. Walk us through your journey. You have a very fascinating journey, and our listeners want to know, how you started, how you got in the space, and how you've kind of reached where you are.
Well, in fact, yeah, that's a question which takes me back to my roots. I would say that probably I started off with having to be a data engineer. That was, 8 years after having to be a technology engineer, which in fact means that, um, I started off as a mainframes analyst, having to work with Infosys. I was working with Bank of America
Hmm.
with their consumer real estate, having to build something splendid on Kick's web services. That got me interested in technology. And after having to be in technology across mainframes, Java, .NET,
Hmm.
I took an interest to business analysis.
Hmm.
And that's when, IABA, the International Institute of Business Analysis,
Yeah.
started upskilling
Hmm.
business analysts across the world.
Yeah.
Ash, I think you'll be familiar with IABA.
I am. Yeah. Yeah. They have the certification CBAP, which is
Indeed.
very popular.
Yeah. So in fact, CPAP was good. We had some splendid working groups, got ourselves upskilled, reskilled on business analysis, got myself certified. Um, then I stumbled upon this opportunity with Royal Bank of Scotland
Hmm.
in London and Edinburgh. And that was around having to set up a data office to formalize a function which a data officer can lead,
Hmm.
more from a compliance perspective, so that PRA is comfortable having to say that there is a control environment for data within the
Hmm.
bank, and they need not worry about any gaps or risk associated with quality of data or definitions of data.
Right.
And that's when um, I put my business analysis skills into play to be able to put an operating model, both a
Yeah.
business operating model and a technology operating model. And that's when I started taking interest into data management and governance.
Nice. Very
And
nice.
that's how my journey into the data world, got kickstarted.
Wow.
Yeah,
And yeah,
that's really fascinating start in the journey you have been on, Tej. I mean, I can relate to that to a certain degree, but not to an extent that you have been doing this. Obviously, you worked in multiple industries and geographies. That's something I can relate to a certain degree. I have worked in India, Korea, South Korea, Japan, and then here in US. But man, that's some serious experience you got
Yeah.
from just working with different industries and geographies. So maybe let me ask you this: obviously working with different geographies and different industries brings some different challenges. What are some of the key different differences that you have observed as you worked with these organizations in their approach to governance or you know latest AI adoption side? So what have you seen to be major differences across these things?
well, I think great to hear that, across most of Asia, I should say.
Mhm.
It'll be good to hear about what you think about this part of the world as well. Well, coming to my experiences, I found that data management and governance is more formal, and it's probably invasive when it comes to UK, which in fact was required because of the alignment to the risk, the regulatory frameworks
The
out
regulatory
there.
framework, which always EMEA is ahead of, right?
Yeah,
Obviously.
indeed. Even for the AI governance, we are seeing something Europe has released as a bellwether for the industry
Right.
on the artificial intelligence front, which in fact puts certain guardrails around the adoption of LLMs, Gen AI,
AI
and other
safety.
models which are out there. Well, when we look at US, I see that there is much value which in fact drives the market around having to manage and govern data. And predominantly, even with artificial intelligence and LLMs taking off mainstream by having to integrate not just as challenger models, but as mainstream models, which in fact are able to give some, insights around personalization or chatbots, which are quite intelligent today, having to manage certain complex events,
Hmm.
which are unplanned for. Now, this is where I get to see that, data management and governance along with AI governance is more value enabled. And when we come back to India, I can see that it's more around data strategy, which is picking up now with certain bit of a formalization with the privacy laws which are just around the corner, like the
Hmm.
DPDPA, that gets to bake in certain best practices and principles of data management and governance. And this law is one of the enabler for the industry along with financial services and the broad heterogeneous landscape out here, including pharmaceuticals or healthcare, to be able to pick up data offices and formal management practices on data privacy security in a way that it's going to help the customers, it's going to help the citizens, and that's something which we are seeing evidently in this
Hmm.
market. And Australia, well, I have been working in Sydney for quite a bit, and that was around a core banking transformation for bank. And I feel that when it comes to technology, Australia picks up at a pace after having to see that the organizations in the rest of the world have been able to see value and reduce risk from an implementation. That's when they get to follow. So I'm seeing
Hmm.
that probably it's more of a value and a risk lever that they pick up rather than just having to focus on regulation or just focusing around value. But they still have certain privacy laws that they need to cater to.
Mm.
So this in fact is certain aspects which I got to see when I was working with diverse organizations across the world. Prash, if you would want to extend on my thoughts about yourself having to work in Korea, Singapore,
Yeah.
uh,
That'd be
and this
interesting.
side
Yeah.
of the world as well.
Right. I mean, the one of the best things about being able to get that international exposure is to your exact point about Australia, right? How do we either be forefront of some of these implementations as the first mover advantage, or the rather, in some cases, especially for these regulatory requirements, as we've seen, we want to see what happens elsewhere, and then we follow the best path forward, right? Like kind of follow the path now, which is proven to be better than someone else risking taking the first stab at that.
Hmm.
I got to experience both of those when I did these implementations. And I remember still distinctly one of the large vendor I worked with was for the first time trying to fit the solution that was mainly built for North America market into a country like Thailand, right,
Hmm.
where the challenges are immense because the data model to everything else that we talk about when it comes to these large implementations of governance and metadata management and master data management, you immediately start seeing the gaps that that product has because it's not really built for those markets,
Right.
but you need to retrofit it, right? It's a very unique challenge in that sense. So yeah, I think we can talk a little bit about these things for a while, I guess. But Ash, I know you have a question about governance,
I
and I'll let
I was
you.
just
Yeah.
wondering, I know that when it comes to regulatory, like you have GDPR was there, BCBS 239. I mostly work in the States and Canada. I did some work in Europe and Greece for some time as well. But I find that Europe is always the first to come out with regulation if you're a regulated industry, closely followed by North America. I don't keep much track of India and Australia for that reason, so it's great to get that perspective. So Tej, you slightly kind of mentioned that there's some new privacy stuff coming out in India. Um, you think that stuff is influenced by, some of the GDPR stuff which came out, or some of the privacy stuff which came in the rest of the world, and now is becoming regulation? Because it's sort of like you said, value versus risk. And in my experience, I've seen whenever I've worked in states, um, the risk taking is very high over there. People like to jump headfirst, and regulation shows up later on.
Well, I think that's an interesting question, Ash. I would say that with the recent DPDPA, which is a privacy law
Hmm.
we are seeing in India, is somewhat a mix of certain principles coming up from GDPR, definitely,
Hmm.
because we can call GDPR as the bellwether of privacy across the
Versus-
world. In fact, I think no questions said on that.
Mm,
But however, what we're getting to see in India is probably a balance between risk taking that an organization or a set of organizations can take
Hmm.
versus also having to build value for customers, which in fact means that I can see that while there are certain aspects around metadata
Hmm.
lineage of where data is coming in from, by having to curate it from customers,
Yeah.
then having to take in consents from customers,
Yeah.
followed by having to use privacy enhancing tech like, let's say, homomorphic encryption or bring your own keys, or certain best practices in data security in
Right.
fact can be cascaded from the principles of privacy as well.
Okay.
And one thing that is unique in India, it's like an UPI movement, right? So today
mm,
we can see payments even made by vendors on the road,
Hmm.
just by having to scan through a QR code.
Yeah.
mm,
So we are seeing and experiencing that UPI moment for privacy, which in fact means that we are going to have consent aggregators who in
Hmm.
fact are going to act as hub and spoke for
Hmm.
organizations, and ourselves as customers will
mm.
be able to maintain our consents with an aggregator, and we can consent on that particular aggregator's platform to be able to
Very
call out
interesting.
whether myself as a customer would I be interested in having to get a better credit card. Let's say I'm interested in having to get a better set of miles on my
Yeah.
card, and there's a
Yeah.
new card that has come out. So I can still give my preferences and consents for having to get such kind of marketing material on my
Communication.
phone.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And that is something which is quite interesting today. We are just
It
waiting
is.
for this moment to materialize and realize.
I would love to see how that evolves, because that sort of consent where a user gives it to aggregator and giving, hey, I let all financial institutions, send me offers, and that itself will allow every company that fits that vertical. I mean, it's complex, this whole space, especially in North America. I'm not sure we will ever get to that concept of aggregation by, consent by aggregation here, but I would love to see how that evolves in India. Talking about value, as you know, AI has been all the rage. Every big service provider, cloud provider is saying, AI is the next value adder. When I look at data governance, I hear a lot about it being the fundamental pillar for AI. You talked about lineage. You talked about sort of where data is coming from and how to build trust with it. A lot of organizations are struggling to implement governance effectively, knowing that it is, sort of this fundamental pillar for AI and transformation which these companies want to make happen. What are the biggest challenges which you have seen, and you work across different geographies, when these companies are trying to set up a strong governance framework? To hear your insights on that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's a question which in fact gets me thinking as well. I would call out that today,
Hmm.
when we are seeing this capabilities across LLMs, Gen AI
Hmm.
maturing with not just commoditized models, but
Mm,
also with open weight models.
Hmm.
It's giving an opportunity for organizations to be able to create platforms which in fact can pick up the best of the both sides
Hmm.
and orchestrate something that in fact can be trusted by the firm as well as by the customers. Now, there are certain aspects when we pick up LLMs or artificial intelligence models from the market, there can be an apprehension. So let's say, we pick up something from DeepSeek,
Hmm.
and are we sure that the data, in fact, resides within the realm of the guardrails? Probably that trust needs to be established, and having to get there is something probably the world is starting off with, but it's a moment where in fact the open weight models are getting to democratize the way that commoditization has happened till now. While we are yet to see this to happen on large scale, probably it's a moment that we started off in terms of having to build platforms
Hmm.
that can enable us to pick up either the chat GPTs of the world,
Hmm.
um, or the Claudes or from Anthropic, or any of the other open weight models that might be coming from India as well. Like Krutram
Hmm.
is
It's
one of the
right.
model that's coming from Ola.
Yeah.
Now that can be an open weight model which can be quite interesting to look at.
Hmm.
Um,
I want to slightly, shift this question and take it back to traditional governance. I think what you mentioned is great from these AI models and governing them. But working with different banks, what are the biggest challenge you have seen, and just one or two in implementing governance, like traditional data governance, where they're actually trying to get the trust in data going on.
yeah, I was trying to get there, Ash.
Sorry.
In fact, it's good. It's good that you asked me that. When I'm seeing traditional governance today, we are still talking about certain good aspects of non-invasive data governance,
Hmm.
which in fact has been popularized for quite some time by Rob or Bob. And in fact, we also see certain best practices which are being put across by the Dharma and the EDM councils of the world, great
Hmm.
organizations, which in fact are getting to crowdsource principles from working groups across multiple firms.
Yes.
Um, and however, I see that, while most of the organizations, be it in India or across the globe, including, Vietnam or Australia, have been able to mature their data governance practices, but you know we are in fact getting to mature our business models in a much faster pace. We're getting to integrate third parties at a much faster pace than how we were able to do it earlier.
Hmm.
um, with the shift in the business models and the principles of corporate governance,
Hmm.
um, I see that there's a specific need even for data governance to evolve, and this can't be said in a stronger way, because most of the governance initiatives out there, they're not ready for having to bake in artificial intelligence governance
So
or
true.
certain
It's all compliance
services.
driven, 100%.
Yeah, for guardrails as a service, even that can be related to compliance. Yeah, and that's where I started having to put in certain frameworks, working frameworks, and living frameworks that are required today to be able to cater to the shift in the business models. Now, one of it is called a contingency framework.
Hmm.
Now, this is popularly available in the corporate governance models, which in fact means that there is one size model which need not fit an organization. Probably in a better way to say it, there is one model that doesn't fit every organization.
Yeah.
So we need to look at contingency factors like the market, the environment, the culture of the organization, whether it's
Hmm.
federated or distributed or centralized.
Hmm.
And all of these factors, in fact, get us to put a framework or an operating model that can best fit the
Hmm.
organization. That apart, there needs to be an evolutionary model as well. That is something which I have recently been working on.
Hmm.
Now, some of these models I have been able to implement in Axis Bank, which was my erstwhile bank
Right.
that I worked with as a chief data officer
Hmm.
and a privacy officer. And we saw that it was working wonders when we connected it to customer experience,
Hmm.
or let's say regulatory compliance,
Hmm.
or certain aspects of marketing like hyper personalized insights to customers. And I see that the shift needs to be there even in data governance. We need to move
Hmm.
from older models. I agree, most of the thought leaders out there in North America as well agree when I exchange thoughts with them, and probably that shift is yet to come.
Yeah.
Good point. I mean,
Great
Tej,
point.
as you were talking about the privacy part of it, the data privacy part, and the rise of AI models and LLMs, which is like, we started this journey in when 2022, I think, right? And since then, the models have exploded in their usage, in their adoption, in the way they're showing up every day. I'm really curious to hear your point of view on how the general governance principle apply to using LLMs, the world of LLMs. My biggest concern is, like, when humans or machines in traditional sense dealt with anything, it was all rule based. It was all like, you do XYZ because certain criteria was met. But now you're talking about systems that are somewhat self-learning, right? So they're using vast amount of data to train themselves, and you can't really, I mean, I can put a query right now into my chat GPT, and I can't expect the same answer next time. It will be a slightly different answer for sure, right? And also, depending on how I ask my question, that answer can totally be written in a different way. So we're talking about the world where there's so much unpredictability, there's hallucination, obviously, that we're all aware of. So I'm really curious how, in your point of view, how the data privacy and all those things, the governance principle apply to ensure the responsible use of AI, right, in the organizations. Going back to even the customer experience example you talked about, like, you can't screw up CX, right? It has to be done right, and if something goes wrong, you are losing those customers very quickly. So, thoughts?
Um, well, that's an interesting chain of thought, I would say, Prash. And where do I start? To start off with, is a AI governance model that we use as a best fit model across the industry, tailored specifically to the needs of, let's say, a financial services firm? Probably not. Again, the same contingency and evolutionary principles will have to be applied to both data and AI governance as well, which in fact I see is a work in progress. And today, as we see LLMs to be evolving, I wouldn't say that we even got to scratch the surface.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Probably the best thing we got to do is integrate them into chatbots. They're able to generate text, summarize text. Would I use them for predicting something? Probably not. There are better models in machine learning and artificial intelligence that can do that for me.
Hmm.
Um, so when it comes to moving from a challenger model into an integrated model in customer experience, LLMs will definitely have to be tried, tested, and trusted, which in fact is something which I am seeing to be evolving.
Hmm.
Um, and I would say that we're using it. We're using it to make our lives better. Our engineers probably are able to efficiently add a pipeline in a couple of minutes, while earlier, having to just get the data mappings, in fact, took us a week. Now, um, to complete a pipeline and to get it working, the average across the industry as a turnaround time is around 21 days. Can you believe it? 21 days just to get a pipeline working, which
Wow.
in fact includes having to manage the data that is there in the source systems, and having to understand where data comes from, and then engineering it through the right set of choice of technology, or ETL or ELT, and then further putting it in a third normal form, and then having to ensure that it's aggregated in a way that it's usable by an artificial intelligence model for hyper personalization or reporting.
Yeah.
Now that's not easy, but have LLMs made it much simple for us? Probably yes. They're able to add efficiency to our engineers, which is excellent. But are they hallucinating? Probably yes. When we are using their insights directly on hyper personalization, I mean, and that's where AI governance and data governance will have to play an important role. I popularly use a Six Sigma framework for data quality across the
Hmm.
organizations that I manage data in.
Hmm.
So currently, you know, Six Sigma is a popular Toyota framework which is used in operations, and having to change it for data management ensures that we are working with qualitative and accurate data, of customers. So we ensure that a customer can be reached it while we call a phone number that exists in our CRM.
Hmm.
Mm.
Because what I experienced earlier is most of the phone numbers or email addresses, in fact, might not be usable. And now we're getting to mature frameworks in data quality, which in fact can be integrated even into our data management practices for LLMs or artificial intelligence. And this, in fact, reduces the hallucination that comes out from inferencing.
Mm.
Hmm.
While that's one of the best practices which I have been able to apply, that apart, metadata is quite important.
Hmm.
Today, when we are using, graph databases or in fact vector databases, having to have metadata around the schema, the table, what a customer name means as a column is in fact quite important to retrieve, the right set of information for the LLM.
Hmm.
Mm.
Um, and that is something which we have seen, and I have personally seen to be, you know, a crucial aspect when it comes to artificial intelligence and generative AI along with LLMs.
Yeah,
Um,
I I think I completely relate to that because one of the things that when DeepSeek came out a couple months ago, the advantage they had over the traditional approach to training and all those things and get efficiency happening is they one of the things they did was to focus on quality data, right? The data that they can actually trust in, even though it's a smaller set of data that they used, which definitely brought speed and productivity and fast and efficiency and all those things we talk about. But it also made sure the output they're going to drive from the LLM is much more accurate with less training they can do with that. I think that for me was was a pivotal moment of like what how can we make it faster, quicker by focusing our energy on right quality data versus just throwing everything into the
Order.
system, right?
Yeah.
yeah,
This is
I
the
can,
same.
yeah.
I'll tell you one quick thing before. Uh, this is exactly the same thing that happened when the whole big data thing became a hype back in, I don't know, 12, 13
2010s.
years
Yeah.
ago, right? Same
Yeah.
thing. People argued that now we have big data systems. They can, process large quantity of data. So you don't need to care about the quality. You just dump everything in there into your data lake, into your whatever, and insights will start to come out. We clearly failed that one, right? So yeah, I'm so happy you mentioned quality data there. I think that's just my point.
Yeah.
I think some of the things you mentioned, Tej, Six Sigma for data quality, the contingency model which you put in Access Bank and connecting with, those are very insightful for me personally because, you know, I'm looking at you like someone who runs experiments, and you take concepts from different places, and you run these small experiments and see how it goes. And then based on that, you're sort of like a data scientist, but not in the traditional term, more like a data governance scientist. And I like that, the way you stitch concepts together. It's very fascinating. Um, you have designed data strategies for, some of the largest banks and some big organizations. I want to talk a second about, if there's a company which is just starting out in its data and AI journey, um, what are like the top three must-have elements for success?
Um, well, I would start off with the first aspect for a firm, that is getting to start its operations,
Mm,
probably a startup, would be to formalize their data quality practices, because
mm,
I agree with Prash as well around quality of data and quality of metadata being paramount,
mm.
even for a startup or a firm of smaller set of operations. So Ash, I think that's going to be the
First,
first aspect which in fact any organization or any
yeah.
firm which is still starting up need to focus on.
Hmm.
Because I remember back in the 1970s when we haven't formalized the word data, we were still managing information
Hmm.
on
Right.
paper. And I was doing some research around which were those firms which were probably doing better on their balance sheets. And what is interesting, they were the ones who in fact got some maker checker process on those papers to be able to see if the addresses of the customers are in fact valid,
Hmm.
and certain information around, let's say, their accounting has been valid or not.
Hmm.
So whoever is managing information right from the days of when capitalism started, when organizations started coming through, um, we have been seeing that information management as a science has helped those organizations grow. And then we had formal data management practices,
Hmm.
which in fact came through the 2000s.
Yeah.
And further, we have some good principles around non-invasive data governance and
Hmm.
certain best frameworks that have come through. Um, and that's an aspect which needs to be evolving, as you said.
Hmm.
Are these evolving as per the corporate governance frameworks that are evolving as well because business models are evolving?
Yeah.
Probably not. So we need some lightweight models as the second aspect
Hmm.
for these firms to pick up. Now, what are those critical dimensions that the firm that is starting up can focus on? Probably can be privacy and
Right.
data security, because without a trust being built with customer
Hmm.
around privacy and security, it's going to be quite challenging to do business.
Hmm.
And the third aspect will be around, having to look at a ready-to-use cloud management for data.
Hmm.
That can be a lake house, that can be an easy-to-use distributed SQL querying tool on data management, or it can be around a quality tool that
Hmm.
can make it much easier for them to integrate quality right into the channels rather
Hmm.
than in a warehouse or a lake house like Snowflake.
I love that
So these
answer.
are certain levers which I think a
Hmm.
firm can focus on, which is just getting to start its operations.
Very cool. I mean, data quality, security, privacy, they're all sort of the core. No, I love that answer. And then having a place where actually putting the data, which enables you with all those three things. No, that's.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things I want to talk about, Tej, is I know you wrote about AI in financial services, right? The financial services is, for me, in my current role here, for example, the company I work for is a big focus for us because those are the biggest companies we serve as an organization. And to be completely honest with you, I mean, they are probably the one who are slow to adopt any AI innovations, as I have seen. But also, I know there are huge opportunities in terms of how these companies in financial services, insurance, banking, and any, like, BFSI in general, can benefit from this, because there is benefit to be achieved from fraud detection to risk management on one side, which is where a lot of focus has been for financial or healthcare companies, but also hyper personalization kind of use cases, right? How do we serve customers in the best way? How do we call their name? How do we know their remember their birth date? How do we serve them knowing? I've been a Chase Bank customer here in US ever since I moved to US 15 years ago now, and I'm not changing bank, but I expect them to treat me well, right? Um, so how do we, like, based on data we know and putting AI into work, how do we provide the best customer experience? Those are the kind of things that come to my mind. I would love to hear your thoughts on this because you've written on this topic.
Yeah, well, I would say that probably we talked about privacy, we talked about security, which in fact is going to be an integral part of our data trust, Prash. I think
Hmm.
when we say that we need organizations like banks, in
Mm,
this particular example, you have given your bank's name, saying that how can your bank be able to build that trust with you is by having to communicate with you um, at your own comfort.
mm,
And that probably is one of the basic enablers for a financial institution to build trust with the customer.
mm,
And today we have been seeing that there is a do not disturb, which in fact is a DND abbreviated,
mm,
um, and there is a consent, which in fact is positive for the customers to give their preferences. to a
Hmm.
bank to say that hey, you know what, we are interested in a certain set of products from you. Can you just market those products to me? Rather than having to do a D&D, which in fact is like a massive blackout on the entire set of products and services. So let's say, a bank gets to invest into consent management and preferences rather than into D&D. A customer did not in fact give a D&D um, for an entire set of products or services from a bank. So that's something which we are seeing as a shift. It's a positive shift that's coming through from privacy. And the next aspect, which in fact I have been talking about, is governance as a service, be it data governance or be it artificial intelligence governance, because um, we don't need to manage every bit of data across every function with the same rigor. Probably we need to manage customer data with rigor, but
Hmm.
we don't need to manage reference data with the same rigor, because we hardly add a city in a state or
Right.
a country. We hardly add a province. It's slow changing dimension, so we can live with
Yeah.
probably a slower pace of managing it.
Yeah.
So the governance needs to be tiered, specific to the pace of management of data that is required in a bank.
Hmm.
And that is something which we in fact need to evolve to. That is an aspect that I've been stressing on in my book as well. So data management and governance as a service can give each of the function or a division in a bank
Hmm.
certain nimbleness to react to an event that happens on data, be it adding a new field
Hmm.
that can capture, let's say, a business phone number that can be an alternate to the existing primary phone number of a business, or let's say if there is a merger or an acquisition for a bank,
Hmm.
having to change the customer name from 35 characters to 40 characters, that can have a cascading impact, right?
Hmm.
And having to react to events like this, which are data related, we'll have to have nimbleness in the way that we manage and govern data. And that's where
Yeah.
data management and governance, when orchestrated as a service, can work wonders for a bank. And that is something which I get to implement in most of the organizations that I work with. So today I work with HDFC,
Hmm.
managing enterprise data. Now I ensure that the frameworks for quality metadata, in fact, are orchestrated as a service,
Hmm.
so that we did not react to every quality event in a way that we react to with certain priority. We can prioritize the events that happen basis the criticality associated with that particular data. Um, and this, coupled with the Six Sigma framework and a data trust, along with a contingency and an evolutionary model, is working wonders for us. And this is something which I write in my book a lot. I blog
Hmm.
about it. I talk to experts like yourselves, and we get to understand how we can make this
Brainstorming.
better.
100%. You know, um, I have not read your book. I've heard about it. But this concept of fast changing data and slow moving data, um, we've had discussions about it. But I liked how you put it together in terms of having a framework to manage it and bringing the front lines of using this concept now to drive alerts for data quality, where you have you know alerts divided by data which moves fast versus slow. And you've given the framework to the function and a bank like HDFC. That is quite impressive. um, One of the books which you've authored recently is Data Risk Management. And I know you write quite often, you have a blog post. Um, as a data management professional, it is one of the things I aspire to do as well. It's hard to find time for it. Um, what inspired you to start writing about data management? And I know Prash, before I even ask this question, has been, I met Prash because of his writing. And I started reading his stuff back in 2012 and 13 when he used to write on IBM MDM. So I know it's a skill which definitely gets you, noticed. What inspired you, Tej, to start writing?
Um, well, that's a difficult question because I need to get back to when I started writing. So probably I was an avid reader
Hmm.
um, of nonfiction, and in fact, I started having to pen down my thoughts around data management and governance from the RBS days.
Hmm.
And that's when I thought, let me put a collective around it, which can be much easier for the rest of the practitioners, because I can see that these standard frameworks are not doing us any good. Um,
Hmm.
and we need to have living frameworks like how we have living walls. So that's something that can breathe and that can react and that can respond. And that's where I started penning down my thoughts around how do we bring these concepts of a service based framework to data management or
Hmm.
data governance or AI governance. And how can we respond at a certain pace to each of these events that are happening around data.
Hmm.
And that apart, I was working with Aquin Financial Services as their data risk leader.
Hmm.
And this was after the bubble burst around
Hmm.
mortgages and mortgage-backed securities.
Hmm.
And there was hue and cry from the customers around you know large banks saying that, hey, probably should we trust the banks around our mortgages or not?
Hmm.
And further to that, we have seen the regulators pressurizing the financial industry
Hmm.
to be able to make it more amicable for the payments from the customers to come through.
Yes.
We saw loss mitigation strategies, we saw foreclosure strategies easing up,
Hmm.
bankruptcy laws getting more rigid.
Yes.
Um, and however, that was the time I was working with Aquin Financial Services. You know, it was, yeah, it was quite stressful to work back then. It was messy.
Hmm.
Operations was probably falling off the hook.
Hmm.
And I started working with